It's getting quiet. Like something's about to start, but you still got a few minutes, guys. You can chat. Talk it up. Yeah, come on, give it up. Give it up for a couple more minutes before we get started. We love that kind of space. But for real, can we give it up for Ben and Jericho who made this thing happen tonight? Like, thank you guys for putting the effort in to administrate this and make it go. That's legit. What else can we cheer for? The Spartans. Go Spartans. Yeah, am I right? Come on. Yeah, okay. Good.
Go Chiefs? Any Chiefs fans? You gotta admit that Bills-Chiefs game? Did you ever watch that? That's like the weekend. Was that the best football of all time this weekend? Except the Chiefs. Except the Chiefs. No, I wish the Bills had won too. I wish they would. They've been great.
Where are you guys from in the room? Can I ask some questions just to get to know you guys? Anybody from the East Coast of Canada? East Coast of Canada. Yeah, come on. All right. What are we talking? Like Newfie, PEI? Nova Scotia. Where in Nova Scotia? Cape Breton. Dude, love it. I lived in Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia for like 7 years of my life. Just outside of Halifax. Great place, unfortunate name. What a great spot. Yeah, man. That'll be good. Okay, what about like Ontario? It's a region of its own. We got some Ontario boys. Fantastic. Like Batchewana Bay area? Or are we talking like Ottawa? Nice. Orleans area? Okay. Yeah. I got my first tattoo in Orleans. Yeah. That was a weird story, man. It was like in an old church with a guy named Pastor Dave who clearly was not a pastor. But it was a good time. Okay, we're going to keep going west. Anybody from Winnipeg or the prairies? Okay, Winnipeg? Southeast what? Like Morden, Winkler? Oh, Landmark. Okay. Oh, Steinbach. Yeah. It's worth the trip, right? You get a good deal at Steinbach on the cars and stuff. Highest skydive in Western Canada is in Steinbach. Did you know that? It's crazy. The highest skydive in Western Canada, like the highest like one that you can do tandem, the longest free fall. So if you're in Steinbach, go skydiving. All right. What about Alberta? We'll just skip Saskatchewan. Just kidding. Saskatchewan. City of Bridges? Saskatoon?
No, just we have the, I'm from down the longest walking distance.
Oh, fantastic. Very nice. Yeah, Saskatchewan. Love that. Okay, now Alberta. Where's the Alberta boys? Hey, let's go. We got some over here. All right. You guys like your beef. Right? All right. Right? That's what you guys are known for? Is that a thing? Stampede? All right. Local. Let's go British Columbia. We got some BC boys. Man, you guys have been raised in the motherland, haven't you? The land of milk and honey. The promised land. It's gorgeous out here. I believe it. Yeah, totally. I was, born on the East Coast. Grew up in Winnipeg. Then moved out here with my wife 8.5 years ago. And I will never go back. Like, right, Rob? Not going back. No, he knows. He's from Texas and then, right, met a girl, moved up here. All right, Ben.
I don't want to ruin your day job here.
This is great. This is a great, can we just keep doing this all night, just getting to know each other?
Do.
No,
Sort of ruin
questions.
that. Okay. We're going to have to use the mics all night so that the people online can hear. So I know some of us could probably talk loud. Most of you guys should talk pretty loud. But thank you all for coming. I think it's going to be a fun evening together. A few more might trickle in as we go. But thank you to all of you guys and everyone that's watching online. I know there's a few dorms that are doing that. Just to share a little bit about tonight and where we're sort of go with it. The subtitle that we gave tonight was Living as Christian Men in a Sexualized World. And that could go a lot of different ways, but I know it's something that probably all of us have come face to face with in some form or another, and an extremely relevant topic for a lot of us. And or we've walked alongside people who have struggled in different areas or whatever it is. It looks different for all of us, but it is just right in our face all the time. And so what better thing to do than start a discussion about it? And our hope for tonight is that this discussion will be really fruitful and really good for you guys. But also it'll start a conversation that can continue past tonight and into your dorms and RAs. This will give you some resources and some sort of conversation starters to open that discussion up, if that's something that you want to do. But yeah, I won't spend too much time talking. I'll let these guys introduce themselves. Jericho's just going to pray for tonight. Before we do that, I'll introduce how we're going to do the question and answer side of things. So if everyone can take out their phone, and this will work for everyone online as well. If you're watching in your dorm, you can submit questions. You're going to go to www.menti.com. It's up on
Start the panel. Okay, let's pray. Thank you, Jesus, for the day. Thank you so much for blessing us with these opportunities for us to be here physically and online. Thank you so much for these three wonderful panelists to be here and also to spend the evening with us and also bless us with really fruitful conversation. And we can get the most out of it and be there for us, be there with us, and bless with lovely evening. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. Do you want to start, Kent?
Thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Kent Clark. Some of you I know, and I've had the privilege of teaching before. Some of you are new faces. I hope I get the privilege of teaching you at some point. I teach in the Religious Studies department. I teach biblical studies, and I teach ancient Greek languages. I've done this, I think, Robin, I've done this at least a couple times before, something like this, maybe a little bit different format. And so I always preclude what I say by saying that I don't speak as an expert therapist or I don't speak as a psychologist. I speak kind of with the biblical text in mind, developing a theology of the body, but probably the greatest voice that I speak out of when I answer these questions is from being a married man for 30 years and from being a man who's often struggled with things like lust and struggled with things like masturbation. And so having success in some of those areas. And so that's kind of the place that I'll speak from. And I'll try and be as transparent and honest as possible, though you can imagine there's a little bit of an intimidation factor speaking in this environment a bit, but I'll be honest.
Thanks, Ken. My name is Rob. I'm the Associate VP of Student Life here at Trinity. I've worked at Trinity for this is my 26th year. We started about the same time, yeah. And I was the university chaplain for 23 years, and I've been in this role for, I guess, about 3 years. My PhD is in acceptance and use of pornography with Christian young adults and in Canada. So that's a topic that I've spent a lot of time in academic study with. And I have to say, one of the best parts, somebody asked me, an alum came back, I had coffee with them today, and they said, so what's, like, you've been here a long time, so what's your favorite thing? And I said, to be honest, this tonight is one of my favorite things, to be able to have an honest conversation with people who want to find their way. Because it's true, it is such a difficult world, especially with the smartphone in your pocket. Just any impulse you can get at something right away, and how do you find your way so that you can live a life that's free, but also should you get married, that it doesn't follow you into that, and should you one day you become a parent, that you can help your kids walk that road. I have 2 kids. My daughter's in her 3rd year here at Trinity, Hannah, and then we have a son that's just completing his teacher education years, 5th year in education. And so I know the road that students walk. So I'm so glad you guys are here. Easiest thing in the world would be to blow this off. So just great to you. And I, too, want to be as honest as I can about the success and failure, because I think ultimately that's what moves the conversation forward, is we not come up with how's this going to look, or I hope nobody, thinks differently of me. We all, there's no moral high ground. We all have burdens that we bear and mistakes we made. So pray that this is a part of the process. And I'll say this at the end. Please always feel free, like you can make an appointment and come and speak to me. Doesn't have to be about the subject we're talking about tonight. It can be about anything, but that would make my day. That's the favorite part of my job, too, is meeting with students, to know that that's always available. All right, Chris.
Awesome. My name's Chris. I am a lead pastor with Village Church at our Langley South location, so that's the one heading out to Abbotsford, just on Fraser Highway. I was a probation officer prior to this, so dealing with a lot of men and women who were of high and very high risk to reoffend in the community, which means they were convicted of an offense, served time either provincially or not, and then ended up in the community. I got to manage the caseload, so helping them find freedom from a lot of things that were bringing them into unconventional lifestyles, whether that be addictions or just even relationships and support. So even a talk like tonight, I think there's going to be things we can draw from in there. But then I come not as, I'm not a doctor, all right? I'm not like these two brilliant men beside me here. But as a pastor, I desire for young men like yourself who are in a world that is super unique, just all the platforms and exposure you have, and some of the stories that I've heard of guys who've really tried to do it really, really, really well, and then have been inundated with things that have just thrown them off course, and guys who carry a lot of shame and a lot of guilt around things they feel like they shouldn't be carrying and doing, whether that be even desires that they have that they wish they didn't, or things that they've put themselves into. But I am also a husband of 16 years with my wife, have 4 kids, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 1-year-old, and they're all boys. And so like conversations like this are super important to me, even to understand how you guys tick. So you guys are helping me as a father, because one day they'll be in your shoes. And even with a 10-year-old, just the things he gets exposed to in a public school setting, whether conversations, thoughts, ideologies, themes that he brings home to me as a dad, I mean, it's something that I just want to really do well before Jesus too, and not without my own struggles. Like, I was raised in the same timeline that had all of this exposure, so I have my own story that I'll draw from tonight too, if that serves the questions and serves you guys well in it. But just of like, how do you walk a relationship with Jesus out, and a relationship with your wife, and with your maybe your girlfriend or whatever context you're in, but how do you do it well in front of Jesus as a man? And that's my hope of what we can help just honestly talk about and equip you with from our perspectives, is to help you guys find success and freedom under Jesus in the midst of walking through a world that is just telling you this is of the utmost priority, this is what you should spend your time and affection and energy seeking after. And now what does it look like to do that well when maybe you're feeling a biblical theme or a biblical impression, or Jesus just saying, hey, I actually want you to live a different way. And that's something that we want to see for you guys. It's just great success in that. So I hope, I'm just here to serve and help answer questions as I can.
I forgot to mention, I too have been married. You can come on up, Jericho. I just got one. I've been married for 26 years too. So, all right, Jericho.
Give it up for Jericho. Come on.
Okay, the first question we have, is masturbation a sin? Anyone want to answer that first?
I think every time that we've done this, that's always the very first question, is masturbation a sin? There are different, I'll just give you my take on this. Masturbating to porn is always a sin. There will never be a time where that's not wrong. I think it's because I think for obvious reasons, it's engaging in something that is moral chaos. Like the porn industry it's so degrading to women. It's so degrading to men, people that participate, all people. And not to shame people that are in that. A lot of times they feel like they have nowhere to go but that. But it is an industry that only strips away dignity. So in viewing porn and masturbating to porn, I would say it is always wrong. I think if you're thinking about a girl, if there's a person you're masturbating to, for sure the Bible is really clear that that is wrong. So the question I always get, so what if I could clear my head of any person? So is it is it theoretically possible for me to masturbate? And, you know, a lot of people say, okay, I just get so horny. I cannot think about anything else. Can I just masturbate, get it over with? And so there's no moral, it's just kind of, I'm just getting this done and out of the way. And for me, and not everybody would agree with me, I don't know if in that moment it's sin, like God is for sure, he's displeased, he's dishonored. There's the passage, 1 Corinthians 10:31, says, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. So I think that is a filter that you have to weigh that decision through. For some people, they're okay and they move on, and it doesn't, you know, they don't get too, you know, they move through it. For other, that verse really does limit them and say, there's really no way this act could happen in a way that is not honoring to God. So that's my opinion. I think that, you know, is it possible that you could masturbate and not be a sin? I guess it is possible if you could clear your mind of that. But I think what the Bible does say, for sure, masturbating to porn, that is something seriously to stay away from. That little cycle, somebody who studied this a lot, of going to that and what you get aroused by, it follows you. It's not as clean as it seems like it is. So it'll follow you. So that's at least my response to get things going.
Great, thanks, Ken. Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. I mean, like, I remember being 17 and older and younger and having this idea of, like, if I didn't at that point masturbate, there'd be a physiological thing, like you're ending up having wet dreams and stuff like that. Like, there is this physiological side to it. And it's just like Rob's saying, like, how often can you untie masturbation from the sin of lusting after someone, and just how available, not just even explicit pornography, but like any Instagram, any TikTok reel you're on, you're talking on Kick, you're on chat, you got fantasies, things that you're just like getting revved up and you're watching shows maybe you shouldn't. I mean, like, just if the conversation is being men in a sexualized world, like the amount of things you have in your mind immediately, like in this spot that you could just click to in your head when you're masturbating, period, is going to bring you down that train of actually like lusting after something that is against, you know, what Jesus might actually have for your life. Now, is there a like, I'm not a doctor, is there a physiological side of masturbation being something you can do separate? Like, I remember I had a friend who was a Christian dude trying to do it well, and he's like, Chris, I found the answer. I found a loophole. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I can masturbate without sinning. I said, okay, what's the loophole? He's like, you just think about Jesus. And I said, I don't think that's the loophole. I think that makes it worse. Like, there's a thing here where, like, but isn't this what our hearts try and do, right? Isn't this what our hearts try and do? Like, we try and find these loopholes where it's not actually like, it's not actually doing what we're trying to achieve with it. And so that's where I think Rob has there's a lot of validity in what you're saying there, Rob. It's like untying that act from something that is sexually sinful, I think is a lot harder to do and I think if we all kind of come to that terms with that, yeah, I think we'd find that to be the case.
Yeah, I would in essence agree. I think as an academic, I want to define what masturbation is. And so is it self-pleasure or self-gratification? That's one definition. Does it mean pleasuring my wife without intercourse? Can that be defined as forms of masturbation? And I think in some places they're appropriate, in some places they're not. I don't think the actual act of masturbation is sin in and of itself. I agree with Rob. The question is, what do you do to get yourself to that place of release or gratification? What goes through your mind? And in the context of your mind is what you're thinking about objectifying somebody else. And even if they don't know that you're objectifying them, to me that would still be problematic. So if you can do that without objectifying or without lusting, I think it's possible. I don't think I was very successful at it. And I also realized the huge tension that we as Christian people and that purity culture says to young men who are bombarded with sexuality to just remain pure and don't do anything about it. And we live in a culture where virtually, I don't know how many times a day we see sexual explicitness on our phones or at the bus stop in a La Senza ad that's there or on TV or whatever it is. And so in some ways, I'm almost sympathetic that we need release. And I'm just not sure how we get that release without lusting. But I'm empathetic to the desire of it. I masturbated as a young man. And even in the context of marriage, I think there's times in marriage where it can be a servanthood thing to do. Is it wrong to lust after my wife? That's an interesting concept. I think it is. Does that mean I'm objectifying my wife? But can I think about my wife in black and white? I wouldn't say no, but it's really hard to actually put in your mind the things that bring about the end result. The other things I think could come out of mutual problem. And in the context of my marriage, as a young married man, kind of heterosexuality, at times masturbation took me away from my healthy responsibility. That's one thing I think that is problematic in society because we're bombarded with such false notions of what good sex is like. Whether we're watching a movie or whatever, whether we're eating pornography. Temperature went out. I think I've been in a place where the actual act of masturbation has been better than the actual act of sex. And so I think that's sometimes based on my fantasy life, where we can build the scenario in our heads and it can be very erotic. Where in the actual I had to turn off because it was so hot. Yeah, so it's going to come back in a second. I just got my brother. Door to door. If I'm masturbating, I'll be okay. My marriage relationship is out. And I'm gonna figure out something. So it's not black and white. There's some areas where it's okay. Can I give it a try again? Give it a try. Masturbation at play. I mean, just think of like, we live in a culture where you can send pictures to one another.
Your wife or your like if I have, let's say, photos of my wife on my phone that I could look at and I could masturbate to, and then I know that, and I know that that's an outlet for me, will that then stop me on a time when she's maybe not feeling it? And my default would be not to then woo her and love her and, you know, love her unto a moment of intimacy, which is what sex was created to be between a man and a wife, to have this beautiful moment of oneness, right? We see this in Matthew 19, where it's like he made the male and female, and said, man shall leave his father's mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And that means like in every way, including physically, but geographically, socially, financially, everything, romantically. It's like, are you doing the hard work to woo your wife into that place of intimacy and to work on your relationship, or have those pictures just become an out in that moment where you can just masturbate to them and you're no longer helping that oneness that defines and should define your relationship? Is it now become something else? And so I think that's a question and a conversation to have with your spouse and before Jesus, saying like, I'm not just looking for black and white, I'm looking for the Spirit of God and the wisdom of my spouse and what's okay in the bounds of our marriage to actually know, is this helpful towards the intimacy that we're pursuing under Jesus? And I think that's a whole other conversation that Kent, you just waded into, but it's a good one.
If you're hiding it from your spouse, I think there's issues.
All right, thanks, guys. Question number 2, our next top question, is opinions and perspectives on doing things outside of sex with a girlfriend or fiance, so hand stuff, oral stuff. Yeah, whoever wants to start.
again, my theology isn't a theology of black and whites. It's a theology of gray areas often, because I think that's how life works. And so I speak out of my own experience. And again, some of you know my story. I became a Christian later in my teens, and through much of my teenage years, it was wine, women, song, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And even as a Christian, I think when I had sexual relationships, there was always a sense of guilt. It wasn't a Christ-informed guilt, but it was more of a usury form of guilt, because I think often in those actions, and it wasn't always intercourse, it was just being physical. I often think that that physicality took place not because there was mutuality, but because maybe I pressured the girl I was with a little bit, or I wanted to get gratification out of it first and foremost rather than her. And so I think that sense of, in any type of intimacy, whether it's with your wife or whether it's with your girlfriend, I think there's an important aspect that relates to the unity of that. And so if you're doing anything physical that's just one-sided, I think that's deeply problematic. And in fact, when we chat with young ladies about this stuff, I actually am pretty hardcore on this, that if a young lady's in a dating relationship and her male boyfriend or partner wants to be more physical than she is, and that male partner pressures her to be more physical, that's a relationship that that young lady should run from. And I preach that and teach that overtly. Because if you're selfish in that incredibly special area, you're going to be imminently more selfish in so many other areas. That's not a healthy relationship, and you're not at a place as a young male of maturity to actually care enough and esteem and cherish that individual enough to be in a healthy relationship. You've got to learn some things. And so that's pretty hardcore for me. When we're talking about levels of sexuality in a dating relationship, again, some of that is going to be individual. It's going to be based on mutual consensus and hopefully open dialogue. Again, in the instances where I was constantly physical with girlfriends, often it led to intercourse. In my view, that's not correct. Premarital sex, I'm traditional Baptist, and I still think that that's problematic. But is it okay to make out? Is it okay to go to second base or third base or do everything except intercourse? Again, there's so many things involved in that. Is lust a contribution to that and to what's happening? Is your own selfishness a contribution to that and what's happening? And then I think there's also other areas in our sexuality or in our relationship where we place sexuality at the center of everything that we do. And so in a dating relationship, sex is beautiful and wonderful. In marriage, it's incredible. But if the marriage isn't good, the sex generally isn't good either. And so I think in a dating relationship, we put so much emphasis upon that physicality when there's other things that we should be building and working towards developing with our partner, that the sexuality should be a secondary thing at best. Because if there's not a closeness and an intimacy intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, then I think there's an aspect of selfishness and usury to that physicalness. So again, I think it's individual. Part of it is how good are you at keeping your boundaries? And I don't know very many young men that say, we're just going to go to second base and that's it. Because second base usually becomes third base, and ultimately third base usually becomes a home run at some point in time. And usually that home run is manipulated by the male context. I'm not talking rape here. There's a consensuality to it, but usually the male is leading the process with some type of pressure or coercion. And so I think we have to be incredibly careful of that.
Yeah, I think I would say, what I would tell you if you're my son, we've had these conversations, I would say, yeah, that it's not right to oral sex, hand job, all that outside of marriage. Because I think it takes you, just like Kent was saying, it takes you down a road and it frames your relationship in a certain way that I think it doesn't, as difficult as this is to probably understand, if it's meant to be, there'll be plenty of time for all of that. Those sorts of things, just like Kent said, you get rolling and you don't get to decide where it ends and when it ends. It seems like, okay, this far, no more, but we've all been there. You say that, and you're just to that point in no time at all. My wife and I have a friend that she became pregnant. It was like, how? Her and her boyfriend didn't have sex. Well, what had happened was they had been doing just like a hand job. He had ejaculated onto his hand and put his hand down there, and she had ended up getting pregnant through that process. And it totally, it changed their lives for sure, what had happened. So the idea that, okay, this is safe, this will not result in anything, I think when you start going down those lines, it really does. You open yourself up to the protection that comes by keeping your relationship in something that is honoring to her, the girl, and honoring to the Lord. One of the things that I think is so key to all of these discussions is 1 Corinthians chapter 6. It talks about that when you're a Christian, and I know not everybody here is a Christian, but if you're a Christian, in your body, the presence of Christ through the Holy Spirit is there. So no matter what you do, wherever you go, whatever you do, especially sexually, you bring that presence of Christ to that moment. So it's not just you doing something and Jesus over there. It's Jesus in that moment and present. So I think that has helped me at least try to make my way through some of these discussions. Because I'm the same way. I grew up in a certain way, and I kind of have preset things that I'm always working through to try to figure out what does the Bible really say. So if you were my son, that's what I would say to you.
Yeah, guys, I think it's a complex world that you guys are living in around this. Dating relationship isn't just happening in physical intimacy in the backseat of a car or when you're watching like a Jennifer Aniston movie on a couch alone when you shouldn't be. Like, you have this, like Rob was talking about, you have your smartphone and something that he's been doing a lot of research into. Pictures, sexting, Snapchats, videos, things that are going back and forth, intimacy that is not like, if you're a follower of Jesus, there should be a mandate on your life to actually avoid some of these things just because he says, hey, if you're lusting in your mind, you may as well just be doing it. You're already committing adultery doing that. And I can't imagine a context where you're like crossing certain boundaries, whether that's, you're talking oral sex, hand jobs, dry humping, all these situations that are like overly sexualized. And how are you not crossing that line, honestly, before Jesus, if that's something that matters to you? And if it's not, you always have to bear the weight of knowing that your relationship is so much more than just a sexual relationship. You ask any of these guys up here, I guarantee it, like their relationship with their wives and the level of intimacy and depth they have with them is not just based on the sexual intimacy that they discover and experience together. That is part of the picture, but you also have an emotional intimacy. You have a spiritual intimacy. You have this connectedness in your intellect, in the ways that you connect and talk and socially engage. There's things that you will do together that will grow that. And one of, I think, the chief struggles that we have as young men, and I know I faced with my wife too, like, is that your sexual intimacy, the physical expression of your intimacy with that girl is going to want to go ahead way faster than the other intimacies that you're facing. And one thing that I deal with all the time with young men is the fact that, because I do a lot of weddings, okay? In the last 6 years, I've officiated over 100 weddings, all right? And with that comes with a ton of premarital counseling and time with the couple. And over and over and over again, I'm seeing Christian couples before Jesus who said they wanted to do it right before him, but they're failing sexually. They've crossed that boundary. Sometimes it's because they've let that part of their intimacy just go way faster than other intimacy that hasn't been growing. They're not there emotionally. They're not there spiritually. They haven't done the hard work that's outside of that, and they've let this part just run rampant. And otherwise, guys, for some of these guys, they just do not get down on one knee fast enough. Like, in a practical way, if you start dating a girl, don't expect to date her for 5 years and do this area of your life really well before Jesus. It's not going to work. That's what I dated my wife for 4 years and then was engaged with her for 1. Like, that is the hardest fight, and it's not one that you're going to win. And so don't set yourself up for failure like that. Like, sometimes we take even just the biblical ethic of like, let's say marriage, when we're like, man, those things are saved. And we'd say, yeah, I believe in the Bible. I believe what it says about these things being reserved for a man and a woman under the constructs of marriage as like a very conventional Christian view and sex ethic. And you'll be like, wow, how do I now live this out if I've been with this girl for this long? Of course, now we're at this level of intimacy, but man, our finances aren't straight yet. I don't have that job I want. I want to get things set and right. And if you go into your relationship with that mindset, where it's like, man, I'm not ready to actually like seriously contemplate marrying this girl, but I'm ready to have everything that comes before it, then you're not going to succeed in that. And I think when it comes down to the grays of like what is permissible before marriage, like how far can I go? Can I get a hand job and be like not feel guilty about it because this panelist said that's okay? It's like, I don't think, one, you're going to probably not find that here, but I think you need to honestly take some of those moments before the Spirit of God and question, hey, is this something that I need to actually know and set a boundary with this girl with? Because no does mean no, like in the context of pushing boundaries. If you set something, don't be the one to force it. Don't be the one to push past it. You're going to want to. And I think that's actually like natural, and one day in a context where she's wanting that too and you're okay to do it, I think it's great that you would have that passion and desire for each other. But in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's not the right choice. And so I would do my best to absolutely set an environment where, hey, if we've created boundaries together, we've talked about that, then we're holding to those. And that I would hope, because I have 4 sons, that they would be guys who would deeply respect that in the girls that they're dating. You know, like go after their hearts, go after their minds, set the curiosity, like go after, like understand them as a person and as a daughter of Jesus, someone who has like made in the image of God, carries that dignity and should be respected in that way. And then, yeah, in expressing your sexuality with each other, there's a place and a time for that in marriage that's good and should be stoked and encouraged and like get at it and have fun, you know? And I think that's something that needs to be described for sure and boundaries set.
Thank you. Another question here. Before we continue, because of tech issues that we have to probably have the mic a bit closer, so people online, they'll be hear them more clearly.
They missed some good stuff, Jericho. They missed some real good stuff.
Okay, the third question. How does lust, pornography, intimacy, outside marriage, etc., did it damage future relationships? How do I deal with the reality of past sin in my life or the life of my girlfriend and the future spouse? Who is ready to answer this time?
You want to start, Rob?
I think that's a great question about I'll start with the last half of what the question was. How do I deal with the past and the decisions I made? And that's, to me, this is such a part of the gospel, because there are so many people that lament the past, and they, when they just think of what they have done, they just like, oh man, it is a cringe moment for them. So one thing that in all of this, one of the things that you can be so consumed by, and this would have been the case for me when I was a young adult and I dealt with masturbation and sexuality and all this stuff, is the shame that I would feel towards myself. I would work out these stupid moral economies that if I masturbated, then I was for sure going to fail a test the next day, and if God was pissed off enough at me, that God always would get a pound of flesh. You got no free passes with God, because it's interesting, that came out of my relationship with my parents. My parents were mad at me, they would just stop talking to me. I got the cold shoulder for like 2 days. Well, I of course transferred that to my relationship with God, and every time I sinned, I just knew that God was like, okay, how many times are you going to have to learn this? And something bad was going to happen. It's just the way God worked. And that was such an idolatrous way. I was so taking the mercy and the beauty and the love and the grace of God and making him in my image. So there's Colossians 1. To me, this is a money passage here, where it says that because of the Christ's crucified body, that we are blameless in his sight, pure and free from accusation. Just know that that is the case. No matter what you do, the mistakes you make and the regrets you have about your past, that because of the work of Jesus on the cross, that you are holy in his sight, blameless and free from accusation. And that's the truth. Stop that. So that is true. So if that is true, then how do you appropriate that in your normal life, and I think in your regular life? And I think some of it is just believing that. Some of it is a repentance to turn from it, say, okay, I learned that, and I don't want to have to learn that lesson again, to move on. So I think that is such an important question. And in my role, I'm 58, in dealing with people, is that I know men, get this, I was talking with a guy who he has a
Intimacy outside of marriage damage future relationships.
Okay, so how does lust, pornography, and intimacy outside of marriage damage or undermine when you do get married?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the big pieces that I'm seeing a lot of, like pastorally with guys and spouses, and they're taking things into their wedding day, is a great deal of shame, like Rob was talking about, like from things that have happened in the past. And shame is such a thief. Like, you guys know it. Some of you guys were worried to come here tonight because of the topic that was being talked about. You weren't sure about how it was going to be held or handled. You weren't sure about what was going to be told. You weren't sure if you were just going to be told again and again of how you're failing and how you're not good enough before Jesus and how you're sinful and all these things. And the gospel comes and tells you something that reminds you, yeah, you're not good enough, but Jesus was. And that you bear his identity and his innocence. That's this change of state where Jesus actually puts a double imputation, right? If you had a ledger of all the bad things you did, even your lust issues mixed in on that, it's all written down, and then there's a ledger of Jesus things that's just blank. It's Jesus giving you his blank ledger of innocence and taking all of your sin and all of your shame and taking it to the cross and dying for those things. And so if you are a follower of Jesus, you live in that renewed, like that new life of Christ. You're now identified with him because it's a question of identity, but shame comes into the picture. But these things that come with you, like a lot of guys think that like when they get married, that's going to be the end all be all of the things that they struggle with. Like they have a porn problem, they have an addiction to something sexually, they're on a blog, they're on chat sites, they're sexting people, they're doing stuff on Instagram, they're flirting with people in that way, and they think it's completely separate from the things in their relationship with their spouse. And then they get married and they realize that two things are going to happen. One, that all of their sexual expectations will not be met because they've been developed by a porn habit that shows unrealistic expectations for anybody, because like Rob was saying, that culture is volatile in the things that they coerce people to do and manipulate people to do and abuse them into, and the way that those things are actually produced. But then like what happens to you then as a young man, if you're engaging in that stuff often, or if you're just thinking, man, this is what it is, and you live in a place where with your phone it's always available to you, anytime I want sex, it's available. You take that and will project it onto like your spouse, and you'll start carrying those things in. So it will absolutely impact what you expect to do. Now let's say you go to your wife one day, and you want to do something sexually you experienced or seen in a porn setting that you're super excited about and something you want to see. That might actually be something now that causes a great deal of tension in your relationship, where she's actually now doing things or not wanting to do things or saying no to things that you really want because you desired them for a while. So you built up this like, oh no, babe, I thought this is what was going to happen because this is the relationship that I had sexually before. This is what I want to happen with you. And if she says no, now what are you doing? Are you going to start like manipulating her through your emotions to actually make her do what you want her to do? Are you going to be disappointed with the expectations that pornography has set for your sex life going into that relationship? Or like those things will carry with you, and then we have to do, and I've seen this, a great deal of counseling around what does a healthy sexuality in marriage look like when you have either the man or the woman, because porn isn't just a male problem, bringing in experiences from the past into their current relationship, and it can cause a lot of pain and hurt, especially if you haven't done the hard work of dealing with it before, or you're carrying in fantasies or expectations or things that will not be met by your spouse, and that can be really harmful. And one of the harder things too is we'll go through process in like a premarital phase where it's like premarital counseling is this thing that you do before you're married, and it's kind of an opportunity to get everything out on the table, like recognizing that there's two sinful individuals with all their baggage, all their problems, everything, two unique, autonomous individuals who are coming and putting everything on the table and saying, wow, this is all my mess, and saying, will you still take this? And that's a beautiful thing about premarital counseling. But with the shame that comes with this history of sexual activity, whether in pornography or otherwise, sometimes people aren't willing to actually say, hey, this is everything. But then what happens over time is through either the expectations they have or things that are said, or when they get more comfortable, they share, there's a lot of pain that comes with that. And you have brokenness, and then it degrades the trust of the relationship to a point that now there's a whole lot of hard work that has to be done to rebuild that trust amongst a relationship. So I think sometimes, yeah, you can bring your expectations, you can bring your addictions, you can bring these things with you into a marriage and into future relationships, and it will harm those things. It doesn't go, it's not like it just disappears once you get married and, oh wow, I'm allowed to have sex now. All of my lusts for all the variety that I've been experiencing and all the things that I've been doing and all the things that I've been doing on my own and the way I've been experiencing masturbation and all the fantasies of what I want are now going to be satisfied. They just won't. Especially if you two are getting used to and understanding what a sexuality between each other is, or you've never had that experience otherwise. you're going to need to learn that with your spouse, and sometimes then your expectations won't be met, and it brings a lot of tension.
Yeah, not much to add. I think 2 points. Marriage isn't a free pass. You bring all the baggage and the stuff that you had before marriage into marriage, and marriage often intensifies that. And so in my own marriage, I brought in some of the things that took place premarital, and even with my wife. My wife I did not have premarital sex with, but we were quite physical. That physicality, again, often at my modest pressure, that introduced guilt into my wife. It created selfish habits in me, so my gratification was more important than other people's gratification, because I think physicality is usually a selfish thing when whether we're in a marriage relationship or a dating relationship. And so when I got married, I didn't all of a sudden become a servant. My wife's guilt didn't all of a sudden dissipate and go away. In fact, it probably took us about 7 or 8 years into our marriage to actually find some balance and to fix some of the problems that my previous sexuality before marriage and the physicalness that my wife and I had before marriage. It took us probably 7 or 8 years to find balance and fix those problems. And sometimes still there are reoccurring problems. And we go back and we talk about those things and we work those things out. So marriage isn't a free pass. If you're thinking that, oh, if I can just make it to marriage, it's going to clean all this up. No, it's not. You're going to bring that baggage with you, and you and your partner, you and your wife are going to have to deal with that at some point. You just don't get away from that. And then the second thing is the shame issue. I'm not a fan of purity culture. I push purity culture away in the context of Christianity, because purity culture is often governed by shame and by disgrace. I'm a huge fan of purity, but I don't like purity culture because of the shame that's often attached to it. And I think as a young man, I think as a middle-aged man, I don't think we become better when we're engrossed or enmeshed in shame. I think we often aspire to the levels that we think we're emotionally and mentally at. And so if I despise myself and if I shame myself, it's probably a better recipe for continued failure than for actually esteeming myself, made in the image of God, being a child of God who's been made perfect through righteousness in Christ. When I think that way about myself, I think it gives me more hope and more ability to actually attain something better and to get out of the habitual sins or to get out of the mental life that's breaking me down. And so I think Rob said it really, really well. We're so good at living in the first part of the gospel, that we're despicable, that we're sinners, that we fall short of the glory of God. And in my own Baptist tradition, we're incredibly bad at actually going to where the gospel is ultimately trying to take us, and that's to freedom, and that's to grace, and that's to loving ourselves, which then allows us to love others. And that's not capitulation to say that sin doesn't matter. Sin does matter, but that's never where the gospel was ever meant to end. And so I know how some of you feel. I know the self-doubt and the shame. I know that you struggle with habitual masturbation and pornography. And on a daily basis, you think, I'm going to do it better. I mean, the deals that you make with God that Rob was talking about, I've made those deals as well. I'm going to masturbate today, or I'm going to view pornography today, and I'm going to be try and be so good for the next week. I don't think that's how God works. And I think when we understand that God's economy is economy of love, an economy of grace, and an economy of wholeness, and when you guys begin to see that, and we begin to move away from shame, which isn't capitulation, when you begin to move away from shame and to see yourselves in Christ, I think that empowers you to actually change actions. That empowers you to control the life of the mind better. It empowers you to be more of a servant to your partner. And that comes from being in a good, healthy headspace and seeing yourself in Christ.
We'll pick up the pace here. I know you got a lot of questions to get through, so we will. All right, let's go.
Awesome, thank you. Our next top question is, how do I know that I'm ready to enter a relationship when it comes to my own battles with lust, or masturbation or pornography? So in other words, I want to do this right. There's this girl, but I'm struggling. What do I do?
I think honesty is really important. So when I met my wife and we started talking more seriously about more long-term dating, and even prior to marriage, I was honest with my wife about my background. And that doesn't mean that I gave her specifics of every girl that I had sex with and the details of that. But my wife knew that I wasn't a virgin. She knew that I had had other sexual encounters. I was fairly honest about my thought life because I wanted our relationship to be different. I wanted it to be based on a good foundation. And thankfully, my wife, some of it was surprising to her. And I often think for Christian young ladies, our males struggle with lust, not that females don't struggle with lust, and I don't ever want to be patriarchal or minimize that females struggle with it as well. But I think in the case of my wife, she was somewhat naive about the physiology of lust and how it worked in a young man. So when I was honest about some of those things, she had to think deeply about that. And so I think being honest about that with our partner is important. It kind of lays a good foundation. And I think the beginning of being ready and mature for that is being in a relationship where you can be honest about that and you can begin to work through those things together before you start becoming more serious. So honesty, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Honesty is important. I wouldn't lead with that, with like the pickup line being, I have a lust issue and I think you're hot. You know, like, I don't think those are the two things that won't work out. No, I agree. I think like there has to be a level of of relational honesty and authenticity in anything that you're actually stepping into. But I wouldn't. Here's the thing, guys. Like this is something you have to be serious about if you want to be a man under Jesus. And if you don't start tackling it now, you will be tackling it later. And if you don't start like actually opening up in the way with good friends, like I just look at the community around here that you guys have. What a privilege it is to be around other young men who you can be honest with and open with in your dorms and in your spaces and like this is a gift that you won't have for the rest of your lives. Like this kind of camaraderie where you're like, hey, let's actually set this up and do it well. Like I have guys who are in the church who literally left their other houses and moved in together for the sole purpose of tackling lust before they stepped into committed marriage relationships. And they called it like Purity House or something like that. And it's like 5 dudes living together doing this thing. But it's like, how cool is that actually? That they be taking it that seriously, that they want to get on top of those sins so that they're not overcome by them. They want to defeat them in their lives so that they can move forward being like, you know, in a good spot to actually honor and love a woman under Jesus in a way that's just like honoring to him and honoring to her and who she is. So it's like right now, if you're struggling with lust in this room, you're thinking of asking a girl out, I'm not saying like don't take her out for coffee and like, but it's like also do the hard work of actually taking this stuff very seriously in your life so that you're not carrying it further into the relationship when you start reaching those intimate moments and those moments where you're like actually now stepping into a committed relationship. Like the goal would be that it's just not in your life at all. But if we're honest, like we have been up on the panel, this might be something that you actually have to wrestle the rest of your lives. Like the idea of lust, where it's like you have to constantly be bouncing your eyes. You have to constantly be careful of what's on your phone. You have to constantly be deleting apps because you know there's going to be things. You have to constantly not be clicking on girls' profiles on Instagram because you're hoping there's a bikini pic in there. You have to constantly be being careful with what you're watching on Reddit and putting filters on. You have to be constantly careful with what kind of communities you're in and what kind of shows you're watching on Netflix or Prime. Like, you guys know this stuff, but are you taking those steps of being intentional for the sake of not falling into the trap of lust? And I'm not saying in a way of like, this is not legalistic. This is not change your identity before Jesus, but it's a huge piece of your discipleship and a huge piece of you being a man in a marriage is doing this right before him and then having that authenticity that you can share and grow in before your spouse.
Douglas Hall Purity House, huh?
Is that a thing? Who's Douglas? Who's Douglas Hall?
Yeah.
Are we matching Douglas? Is that? Happy birthday.
All right, next question.
So what are the ways that we can use that can be practical for us to battle pornography or lust, stuff like that?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, okay, to me, this is another money verse in this, okay? It's 2 Timothy, sorry to go all biblical, 2 Timothy 2:22, okay? It's easy to remember, 2. Is right. It says, flee from your youthful lust, pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call upon the Lord from a pure heart. To me, so much wisdom. First of all, flee. The idea of move yourself from a place and a time that is most tempting to you. The idea of what you do right before you go to bed. There is something about being tired, laying down, and your phone. Because you know, you think, oh, Instagram, I'll check Instagram. Oh, a girl in bikini. I want to see more girls in bikini. And then the engine starts and you are up and rolling. So I would say your phone and falling asleep, separate those two. If you have one takeaway from me tonight, it's your phone and falling asleep. If you can put like a 15 or 30 minutes, just put it in another side of the house. Yeah, that's what people do. Guys will take them and stack them in a place that everybody can see that everybody's phone is there. So I think that's a key thing. So, and the idea of fleeing, moving from places and times, like some guys, there's a guy that I'm an accountability person with on Covenant Eyes. If he's going to mess up, it's in the morning. It's like 7:30. It is always in like a 30-minute range. So for him, he's got to find a way in that time of the day to somehow not be in a private place with his phone, because it is just a recipe for disaster. So knowing what are the times and what's the mood and what's the space that you can get into, that it's just easy to fall into that, where you can easily in your mind think, oh, it's been a while, it's not that big a deal. You know, you just can all of a sudden make a case for how this makes perfect sense for you to do. So I think flee, pursue the things that are good and right and pure and excellent. Relationships, that makes a big difference, having good friendships with those who call upon the Lord from a pure heart. So having other people that you share with. That's such a key, is that you have people that you can be honest. That will serve you so well in your life. And we all feel this. When I've done something that I regret, there's a group of guys that I'm going to meet with at 6:30 in the morning that I hated to admit when I've done something that I know I shouldn't. But getting over that hump of being able to say, I did this is what I did, I regret it, this was the circumstance, that will serve you so well in your life. The minute you start this parallel life where you never tell anybody about anything that you do, that's when you're at a dangerous point. But when you have people in your dorms, I know the CFs, that would be a huge win for them, is that your dorms become a place where you can be open. Maybe it's not with everybody, but at least it's with somebody, and see yourself move forward. So I think running towards the right things and running with people, that's the best advice I could give.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And guys, running from means deleting things from your phone. Like some of you right now have a secret picture file on your phone that you just need to delete. Some of you right now, you have to just go and actually delete apps like Instagram. You got to delete places you're going to find the crumbs, where you're going to see the girl in the bikini that's going to rev the engine at any time of day whenever you're by yourself. And you know that. Like, you know exactly what's actually, but if you're filled with shame a lot of times, that's going to actually kill the ability for you to be curious enough to figure out when and where and what is causing your desire for these things, right? Sometimes it's a show you watch that you love yourself, that you can justify, like, oh, I love Game of Thrones because I love the medieval stuff and dragons. It's like, yeah, okay, man, like, there's a couple other things you love in that too that maybe you shouldn't, right? Like, you don't need us to tell you what those things are, but you need to have some time to critically assess what those things are and what triggers you. Like, if I was driving by a McDonald's and I wanted to eat a Big Mac, and I shouldn't eat a Big Mac, look at me, okay? It's like, maybe there's something where, like, I gotta find the outs before I actually take that bite. And maybe you need to do that in your own life when it comes to lust and pornography. It's like, man, what cues me up? Is it this app? Is it this profile? Is it this story? Is it this person? Is it this conversation that I'm having? Is it this way the person flirts with me? Is it what? And you gotta be able to take some of those, my buddy calls them crumbs. You know, when the crumbs are, what are the crumbs that lead you to the thing you don't want? It's like, that's what you need to be able to identify and flee from. And then authentic relationship will be a huge key in this. One of the things we do, and this will actually help you in your relationship with Jesus. At Village Church, we go through this program called Freedom Session. And I did that with my spouse, with all the other lead pastors. And in that, it actually demands that you be fully authentic with somebody, with a sponsor. And we as pastors did it with each other, where we're fully authentic with each other and with our spouses. And it's like, there's that last 5% of your life, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 1, that percent that you just won't share with anybody. My goodness, it is freeing to share that with somebody. And someone who loves Jesus, knows the gospel, and is going to tell you, hey, you're forgiven and you're loved. And that be the response that you get when the reason you're not sharing it is because you're worried of being judged. You're worrying of being told you're not good enough. You're worrying of what people are going to think about you, for them to say, no, like, I love you, you're forgiven, and remind you of what Jesus Christ did for you and what that means for your life and how he sacrificed for you, on how you were pure before him. Like, there are some of those steps you have to take, but do that in an authentic place. That is like a huge key, is having authentic relationships you can be real with, for sure.
Awesome. Our next question is, how do I explain the ramifications of porn to someone who's convinced that it's not bad? How do I have that conversation? How do I explain that to somebody?
I don't want to talk too much. Yeah, I think, there's a website or a group called, it's Fight the New Drug, but it's called, it is Body, Heart, Mind. Does somebody know what I'm talking about? It's a series of videos.
Body, Heart, Mind, Soul.
What is it?
Body, Heart, Mind, Soul.
Body, Heart, there's three
World,
though.
I think world.
World.
Yeah.
Body, Heart, World.
Yeah.
That is an excellent resource. It's put out by the people that do Fight the New Drug. So they're great resources. That's a great place to start. If you like them on Facebook, they'll push so much great content. But that shows how, and this is to a non-Christian, it's a Mormon group that puts it out, but they do a great job of showing how it, the effects that it has just on your own mind when you viewing pornography, the way it molds your affections and the way that things that you start loving and your tendencies and your tastes, and then the degrading nature that it brings to the world, the way that human trafficking is so connected to pornography. So check that out. That's a great resource for you. They do it in a very cool, facts and creative, high quality sort of way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just like, it is harmful. It's harmful to your mind, it's harmful to how you think about sexuality, it's harmful to how you view people. If your mind is so porn-filled and incubated by porn images, you're gonna stop looking at women as individuals or people who bear the image of God, and that's the way they were designed. You're gonna look to them as objects of your own gratification. It's gonna change your mind about when you're talking to them and what you're thinking, your motivations, how you're actually pursuing them, what you're pursuing with them. It's gonna change. I've talked to guys who have been so inundated with pornography that they ended up abusing their children sexually because of their addiction to porn. So if someone talks to me and tells me that it's not harmful, what harm can it do? I can point to situation after situation that I've had with men who've gone down the rabbit hole of addiction to pornography, and it's turned out to be something that's been incredibly detrimental to both their own mental health, their own self-worth, their own shame that they face in their life, and the value of other people that God has given to them and entrusted with them to actually raise in, if we believe Ephesians 6, Deuteronomy, in the instruction and discipline of the Lord, and things that they've been responsible in leading, and actually God's call on a man in a marriage is to lay down his life for his wife, and instead they impose sexual ideas and ideologies and things that they've seen and watched on them when they're not comfortable with it, like sexual abuse happening in the marriage. So any person, even outside of a Christian worldview, who believes in the idea of value for a human, which is our whole culture is going that way. Look at everything that, the value of an individual human, right? Everybody has their own autonomy and power, and that's something that's to be valued, even aside from the physicality, what they believe and feel. And yet a porn ethic is something that now imposes a different sexual ethic from a place that's not healthy on people who wouldn't want it. So if, there are significant, that Brain Heart World, Brain Heart World is a document, it's a 30-minute documentary that just helps you understand how even the neurological pathways in your brain are now being rewired to think a certain way and to go a certain way in regards to lust and pornography. But the beautiful hope is that it can be rewired. Your brain, in abstaining from some of those things, can be completely rewired. So if you're dealing with a porn addiction and being oh man, yeah, I'm getting, my time is being taken up by this, my productivity is being taken away from this, I can't even do homework unless I masturbate to it, I can't think with girls, I'm sending things around, this is the kind of stuff that you have to now question and say, wow, am I actually in a place where my brain needs to be rewired, the renewing of my mind, even with the power of the Spirit, of the Holy Spirit of God, to actually renew your mind in a way that you can be a new man. That still can happen, and there's hope there, and that's what the science is even pointing to, saying, hey, if this is a problem for you, it's been taking you down a wrong path, there is science behind saying your brain can be rewired to be free from it. And I hope that's hope to anybody struggling here, where it's there is hope beyond the struggle that you're in currently, the addiction you're facing. There is hope for, even in a physiological stance, science is saying, man, you can be free from this addiction.
Okay, this one is really interesting. Being single in a sexualized world, how do I or you avoid the continual pressure to have a girlfriend? why should we date in the sexualized world?
Like you don't want a girlfriend, but you're being forced to have a girlfriend? Is that the question?
Okay, let me repeat the question again. Being single in the sexualized world, how do you avoid the continual pressure to have a girlfriend?
I'll start, but I'm sure I'm not going to end. I think so much of our self-esteem is based on who our partner is. And I think we all know that we live in a hypersexual culture, and that our value and our worth is often based on who we're hooked up with or how often we have sex, particularly as men. Sorry, thank you. And I think that's part of the problem, is because our sexuality's become such a center of who we are. Our sexuality is really important. In marriage, our sexuality is important. But you've probably heard 2 or 3 times tonight that that's only a singular component of our whole ontology. Ontology is just a fancy word for our being. So I'm not just a sexual being. And yet it's interesting, in so many of the conversations that we have in culture, so many of the movies, so much of the media that we consume, it's focusing on hypersexuality. So it's hard to find a narrative that isn't driven by sexuality, whether we're watching a movie or listening to a podcast or whatever it might be. And so clearly, because of that centrality of sexuality, our self-worth becomes based upon that. And I think that's deeply problematic, especially for those of you that are single. Again, even single culture can promote aspects of shame by those of us that are not single. And we think that if you're single, there's something wrong with you. That can be shaming, that can be marginalizing, it can even be discriminatory. And I think that that's incredibly problematic. And I think one of the ways that we deal with that is, again, we recognize ourselves in the image of God, the Imago Dei. The Imago Dei isn't simply about sexuality. That's a component of it, our physicality, but there's so many other parts of me that are integrally important to who I am. And I actually think that my sexuality isn't even near the top 5 components of who I am. And so I think if we learn who we are in Christ, if we learn emotionally who we are, if we learn spiritually who we are, if we learn physically who we are, I think we are better when we have a well-rounded view of ourselves. And then the sexuality doesn't become such a primary or singular component to who we are. And then we recognize that there might be a giftedness in singleness. We recognize that being single doesn't take away from my ability to be compassionate, for my ability to be gracious, for my ability to be a servant, for my ability to be wise. But I just think that's really difficult to do when we're bombarded with this ultra or hypersexual narrative that we face so often. So.
Good stuff. I mean, just learning to be as you're walking forward, as you come forward. Yeah, it's tough because I mean, it's so normal to want to be in an intimate relationship, to have a friend, to date somebody. So I think that's a great aspiration. It's a natural sort of thing, and it happens when it happens, right? The more you try to force it, the more it doesn't go. So I would, as much as you can, chill out. All right. Sorry. Go ahead. Oh, we got more.
Sort of. I keep talking. I hope it's not too much for us here. But I think that anyone who's in a bad relationship will tell you that it's better to be single than to be in a bad relationship. That's why you see divorce rates spiking. That's why you see people leaving them and people trapped in relationships they don't love. Don't rush yourself into a relationship because there's pressure on you to experience something sexual or otherwise, even just to have the title of a relationship. If you're living away from your parents, that's probably one of the questions they're asking you. Did you meet a girl yet? That's the point of university. It's what is happening here, Mom? It's that. Don't take that as a pressure to rush yourself into that. I think that you can have a wholeness of life without experiencing a relationship. If we look to Jesus as the author, the one that we should actually look to and be sanctified towards, and we look at his life, through Scripture and what he's done, he lived a full human existence without being in a relationship, without being sexually active in any way. Like, we see him having a fullness of human life and experience. Then I believe that you can also have a fullness of human life experience as a single person in the world. And I think what the church context sometimes misses is the singles in our community, because they're not quite sure what to do with them. Like, they're great with couples because they assume that like 92% or whatever people will get married at some point, so throw all their eggs in that basket. But you as a single person still have the same mandate of learning and understanding who Jesus is, growing in your affections for him, your desire to know him and love him and want him. And then in the stuff we're talking about tonight, like getting yourself to a place where you find freedom for some of the things that just ensnare so easily and are always around us. Like, just like Kent was saying, like, your existence is not based on your sexual experience. And I think that's something that we all need to take in. But it's not the narrative of our culture, which, like, every song you listen to on the radio, gotta have sex, are you having sex, have tons of sex. And, like, it's like, that's just what the songs are. It's all about everything but, like, the other things that give you value in life and fulfillment, and the things you're not gonna be, like, when you're married, you're not gonna be having sex 90% of the time. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, guys. All right? So you're like, oh no. You know, there's a whole lot more to life and to fullness of life than a sexual experience or even a dating relationship. That would be my encouragement to you.
Awesome. So we'll just have one or two more things here to say. One of our top questions now is, what if I feel pressure from my significant other to be more physical? And how do I establish boundaries without hurting her feelings? I know we talked about the other side of it, but what does this look like?
So the girl I dated before my wife was the second Christian girl I'd ever dated in my life, and she was a beautiful Mennonite girl, and she was horny. And so I was coming kind of as a new Christian, trying to have boundaries, trying to establish boundaries, trying to be a good, godly man. And that young lady and I, we broke boundaries so often that it wasn't even funny. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And it's somebody that I really cared for. And we were actually, the relationship was quite serious. We had dated for almost 2 years. And we had begun talking about marriage. And ultimately that relationship ended because I broke it off. Because we kept breaking our boundaries. And I talked about issues of guilt. I had huge issues of guilt and shame because I couldn't maintain those boundaries. And 90% of the time, I wasn't the initiator of breaking those boundaries. It was her. So lust isn't just a male problem, not in any way, shape, or form. I think the way that I would deal with that now as a more mature male looking back on that relationship, I think I would have tried to explain that I wanted to cherish her and respect and honor and value her in ways outside of just physicality. And for me, to not actually take that away from her or to be overly physical with her, I think that could be an act of love and an act of servanthood. And so I think I would do my best to reiterate that I don't want to cross these boundaries because I respect and care about you too much that I want to wait until this is in the right context and at the right point in time. And I don't know many women that would probably push back against that and say, well, that sucks, we're done. I think when a woman is cherished that way, and when she's cherished out of the fact that as a young man, you want to care for her and honor her, I think that would be a pretty incredible thing. Rather than pressuring, but actually just pulling back and cherishing and loving and respecting. I don't know what young woman wouldn't want that, so.
Yeah, rehearse these 4 words if that's your problem. Will you marry me? Okay, I'm totally kidding, guys. You know what? You guys are okay to have a voice in your relationship and not play the general mandate that men are always horny and just want it all the time. You guys are allowed to have boundaries, and you're allowed to set boundaries, and you're allowed to say no, and you're allowed to have those things and be able to do that in your own life and in your own context. So make sure that you utilize your voice in that and share in an honest way with her about how that's either making you uncomfortable or some of the boundaries you'd want to have or some of the things you'd want to carry into that relationship and how you want that relationship to go as a man and as someone who actually has boundaries and convictions and life before Jesus and accountability that you're sharing with, and just explain that. Like, it shouldn't just be a sexual relationship you're having anyway. So hopefully there's more heart to it and the care for one another. And if there isn't at that point, if she's not respecting your boundaries in the same way, maybe she's not a girl that aligns with the same values that you might have and someone that you want to spend your life with. So why are you wasting your time with her? Why don't you switch and find somebody who does? You know, because there is a point where, you know, relationships don't work on the basis of sexuality sometimes, and you have to be careful about that. And if someone's pushing you into things that you're uncomfortable with, I would say that's a flag enough to investigate. Is this the relationship that you need to be in?
Awesome. Well, we're getting close to 10:30 here. So I'm going to ask you guys to just share any closing thoughts that you have, a message of hope if you if you want to sort of share that to close us off, and then Rob at the end if you want to pray. All of these guys have the last word. One thing I will say is I know there were a lot of questions we didn't get to. If you want to follow up with any of them, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that, or any of the community life staff too. I know Andrew's mentioned that they'd be happy to follow up with anyone, your RAs, your CFs, whoever. If you have more questions, want to have more conversations about this, there's still half hour left in dorm meeting too, so if you guys go back to your dorms and want to continue this conversation, debrief it a little bit, that'd be awesome. But yeah, if you guys want to close, however you'd like to, some closing remarks, whatever it is, and then Rob will pray to send us out.
I guess closing thoughts. I know how intense of a struggle this can be for many of you. I want to make sure that you know that there's hope. There's hope in community, knowing that there's others beside you struggling. There's hope in transparency and confession, in sharing with each other and being accountable. And there's also hope as you get older and you mature emotionally, you mature spiritually, you mature physically, that you actually can build better perspectives on these things. And so what I know now as a 54-year-old man is that it does get better. It's a long time and it's a long process, and that part sucks, but it does get better. I have an older male mentor who shared this with me, and it's probably one of the most profound things that I've ever had shared with me about sexuality. There's two primary problems, and I think, Chris, you probably reiterate this in the context of marriage counseling, but my wife and I have often given marriage counseling as well, and in our own marriage we're examples of this. The two primary marital problems that we or couples often face are sexual issues and financial issues. Those are the two big ones, and those are often the two that end up breaking marriages. In the sexual area, I think I'm a much better lover at 54 years old than I was at 22 or 19. And I think my wife would strongly agree with that. We were married at 24. I'm a much better lover. And I don't want to speak in a derogatory way, but as a 19-year-old young buck, you're not there yet. You're not having the best sex of your life. You're just not. And I expect that that's what the other two gentlemen up here would say. There's something about a maturing relationship. There's something about a man knowing how his body works and a woman knowing how her body works. There's something about being in a committed relationship that over time and practice, and that's true of sex, of being a good lover, and that's the difference between being a good lover and just having sex. It's actually a maturity. It's me knowing in a 30-year committed relationship what it is that pleasures my wife, what it is that brings my wife to orgasm, what she likes and what she desires, and learning how to read moods. And so it gets better over time. And I think that all of the stuff that happened before I was married, that stuff, that wasn't positive. It actually took away from things happening and becoming better in the context of our marriage. But ultimately, my message would be encouragement and hope. It does get easier. Even from a perspective, my wife and I are very sexual active, 54 years old. We still have regular sex. It's passionate, it's intimate, it's romantic. And I'm not saying this as a joke, I mean this sincerely. Probably in the last 5 years, my wife and I have the best sexual relationship we've ever had. It just fits well, it's comfortable, it's intimate, it's beautiful, and it's godly. And so I think that that takes a while to get to, and it takes certain context and maturity to get to as well.
Rob, I'll let you shut down, so I'll go next. yeah, guys, you're in a sexualized world. You're doing the best you can, if you're actually trying to do the best you can. I think there's some practical steps some of us could take tonight, whether that be finding someone that you can actually be authentic with and just kind of throwing out the idea that shame should narrate your life and what you share with people. Find someone you trust and just let them know, hey, I'm a sinner, I've been struggling with porn and lust. And you don't have to get into the details, but just to say that, I guarantee there'll be some freedom in your soul because you've said those words out loud and maybe you've been hiding it, trying to hold it together. Find someone you trust. And then if you're that person that someone trusts tonight with that, remind them of those two things. You're forgiven and I love you. Like, you're forgiven by Jesus and his blood, what he's accomplished. And I love you as a friend and a brother. And hey, we're going to walk through this and help each other find freedom, because guaranteed you're probably struggling on some level too, because it's such a it's everywhere you look. It's all over the place, right? Like, I remember one guy, he was so stoked. He comes in and he's telling me how he's been 3 months free from pornography. And he's so excited about this. And then he goes to Fort Langley and a gust of wind blows up the skirt of a girl in front of him. And he sees her bare butt and he's freaking out. And he's and then I fell into porn that night. And he was so ashamed and burdened because he hit this trigger that just threw him back down the rabbit hole of it. And my narration for him and my story with him was just let's get back up. Let's get back on the horse. Let's make sure and try and continue to defeat the sin of lust and pornography in your life that's just entrapped and ensnared you, because there's freedom on the other side, guys. Carrying shame isn't the freedom that Jesus wants for you. And he's not surprised you're sinful. And guess what? Neither are your friends. And neither am I as a pastor. You won't surprise anyone. And so I'm even just going to say this, I'm going to stick around here for the next half an hour plus, however long. If you have questions that you just want explicitly answered, I'm just here as a resource to serve you tonight. My wife's going to sleep already, so I will stay here as long as it takes to help you guys you guys are all laughing with the context. Okay, so nothing's waiting for you at home, Chris. Okay, you stick out here with us. Yeah, listen, I'm here to serve you in a real way and in an honest way because I want to be helpful. And if there's questions that you've had tonight, or if there's things where you even want to talk to somebody you don't know, like a pastor, confession booth level, I just got to say this out loud to somebody, man, I'll be that confidential person for you tonight if that helps you get freedom from this. Because that's what Jesus wants for you. He didn't die on the cross and pay for your sin so that you would keep paying the price and not be functionally forgiven for the things that you've done wrong. He died on the cross to actually forgive you and free you. So stop paying it with the burden of shame. He already paid for that. And now's the night for freedom. All right.
All right, that's great. Yeah.
My wife and I have been talking about this all week, so I'm going home to make love tonight.
So he won't be around to answer your questions.
Yeah, he wants to get out of here. So, yeah, you should stick around and keep asking him lots of questions. Great questions. All right, well, I'm not sure what to say after that. Saying more would be saying less. So, I'm just going to pray. Let's stand up. Everybody stand up. I'm going to pray, and then you guys are out of here. All right, Lord, thank you so much again for the men here. This is one of can be one of the great journeys in our lives. So I pray every bit of grace for them as they hand over their past to you, that you would give them a vision for what you desire for them to be, and how we can be such great companions in that journey together. I pray that in areas where shame overwhelms and people cannot find the nerve or what it takes to speak up, that they would be able to do that. These conversations in the dorms, the dorm groups would be great places for this to begin. So we commit this to you. Pray that all that was said here, we just turn it over to you. Pray that you would use it as only you can, or only you will, and that whatever is true and honorable and right and pure and excellent and anything worthy of praise, that these would be the things that our lives are bent around and centered upon. So we pray all of this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen. All right, great. Well, we definitely want to keep talking, so have a great evening.